Hi, everyone. My name is Lynell Williams, and I'm a mental health therapist, mental health counselor, mental health advocate. Honestly, anything mental health, that's me. I can talk about this literally all day. And so it's really amazing to be here and be able to talk about mental health in the middle of a pandemic. And I'm just really grateful for being able to be in a church and attend a church that honestly brings us into awareness and talks about mental health because it's something that a lot of people are going through, but a lot of people don't talk about. And so I'm so grateful for the leaders here that continuously go to the needs or meet the needs of the people or the members here that attend here. So I've always been grateful for that. And so when they asked me to talk about, mental health during a pandemic, I got really excited. And so my supervisor, she'll call it geeking out. And so I get to geek out on this topic of mental health. So I made sure that I wrote some things down that I feel like a lot of you guys can benefit from, a lot of you guys might need to hear. And honestly, I want you to be able to see yourself in some of the things that I'm saying so that you can realize some of the things that you may have been going through during this time. So before I get started, I do want to do a check-in. I'm so big on check-ins. And so I just want to check in to see how you guys are doing. Feel free to comment. Feel free to give a thumbs up, give a middle thumb, give a down thumb. Just really being honest with yourself. Like, how have you guys been doing? And I know that that question of how are you doing today or how are you feeling today is kind of like our routine or our normal, like when we're talking to people, we're normally like, how are you doing? And then we kind of like stop thinking about it or we don't really wait for the answer. But I'm letting you know now that when I ask you how you're doing, I really, really mean it. So you got to be careful how you answer that with me. I swear I can be in a grocery store and I'll just briefly ask somebody like, how are you doing today? And if they slip up and they say the wrong thing and say something along the lines of, I'm not doing too good today or I'm just making it, it literally takes everything in me not to ask the question of like, oh, Lynell, take your therapist hat off and ask, how are you doing today? How are you taking care of yourself? Like, have you done a check-in? So I always warn people around me, you gotta be careful how you answer that with me because we'll have a whole therapy session no matter where we are. Trust me, I have done it. So as we talk about mental health during a pandemic, we've really seen a lot of uncertainty during these times. I mean, we've experienced so many things like grief, we experienced loss in many different ways. Yes, it's allowed us to slow down, but also it has put a pause on a lot of the things that we are so used to doing. And so, as a therapist, I see this in so many different settings. And so currently, as a mental health therapist, I work in two settings, as we call it. So I work at Georgia State University. I work at their counseling center. And I just love working with the college population and working with that age group through that life transition of, what they're going through. So many people discount the problems or the concerns of this age group or this population, but I see so much about what they're going through amongst like the pandemic, and not to add on like a whole bunch of schoolwork. It can definitely be a lot. And another reason I'm really drawn to this age group is because a lot of the older people that I see when I work with other older people, a lot of the times they talk about traumas or things that they were going through during that transitional period when they were in college. And so I always think like if I can just jump in there and talk to them during that time, maybe I can start some early healing or prevent some of the things that they have to go through. So that's always going to be a population that's really near and dear to me. And then also, I work in a private practice setting. And so in my private practice setting, I see individuals, I see couples, I see groups, I see families, and I work with a lot of different concerns. So I work with depression, anxiety, life transitions, betrayal trauma, PTSD, self-esteem, self-concept. And I really love working in a variety of different settings because I get to see so much and I get to work with so many different people. And so in specifically, well, I'll say both settings, even the college setting that I work in and the private practice, we've been talking a lot in our little clinician groups. We talk a lot about how our caseloads have been getting fairly high, right? And I don't mean just regular high where you're like kind of balancing. It's gotten to a point where most clinicians are at their max caseload. Right? And I even saw some people talking in a group and they said they have a waiting list. I'm not trying to say that this doesn't happen often, but this doesn't happen very often, not that I know of. I even saw a clinician say that she has a wait list of about 25 to 30 people. That's a lot. That's a lot for any business, any profession, but specifically therapy. That's really kind of unheard of. I've heard about 2 to 3 wait lists, or a couple people who really specifically want to work with you. But a lot of the times, this is happening because people are really suffering. And so every single clinician, a lot of clinicians are really getting to their higher caseload, and they're actually having waiting lists. And so it's like, what is happening? What is going on, and what is the pandemic bringing to people where clinicians are having these high wait lists? And it makes me also think of how many people are suffering in silence, because I know I can ask anybody probably today, like, how many people have talked to you about what they've been going through? Many people will say a lot of people haven't reached out, or they haven't really expressed what they're going through, but it makes me think of how many people are really suffering in silence because they feel like they can't talk to other people, or they can't reach out to other people or talk to other people about what they're going through. And so I like to think that at times I'm like a researcher. I know I'm not necessarily a researcher, but I do like to think I'm a researcher. And so I have like these hypotheses or these theses, and I even bounce them off my clients sometimes. And so I'll ask the question, like, I wonder if this is related to this, or this is related to this, and we'll kind of like test it out and let's see. And so in my researcher brain, I had this question. I said, are people who are struggling right now, have they always had, an underlying concern, and it's just now getting heightened, or they're just now having to talk about it? Or is it just coming up? Because a lot of people that I've been seeing, a lot of them are like, I have never had mental health concerns before, and now it's showing up for me in ways that I cannot control. And then I have other people on the other side, like, okay, I've kind of experienced some mental health concerns, but this time it's unmanageable. And I hear that word a lot, like unmanageable. And so I'm wondering, I'm like, so how many people have been secretly struggling, but now have been having to address these concerns or these issues? And so I was talking with a colleague, and she had the greatest analogy. And I'm so big on analogies. Like, you can be talking to me regularly, and you say like something like analogy, and I'm like, ooh, I'm writing that down, because it just makes sense for me in that way. And so I love a good analogy or a good metaphor. And so she was like, Lynell, think about a car. I'm okay. She said, think about a car, and imagine you're driving your car, and one day it starts to make like this noise, right? And when she said this, that really triggered something for me, because I do not like anything that has to deal with the car. I don't like car problems, because I know it's always gonna be this or that. It's always gonna cost money. And so when she said that, I was like, ooh, okay, where are you going with this? So she said, think about a car. You're driving a car, and the car starts making noise, right? And so sometimes, when you don't wanna address it, you're like, I'm gonna turn the volume up. Let me just, I don't hear anything. Turn the volume up. And so you're driving, and you don't hear the noise anymore. You're good, right? So you think. So the next day, you get in your car, and you're driving again, and the noise gets louder. And so you're like, you know what? Let me turn the volume up. Let me just go ahead and turn the volume up. And sometimes I would even put the window down for a little bit of background noise, because you want to drown it out all the way, get your little white noise in the background. And so you drown it out. Then the next time, the car starts to kind of shake. Right? And so you get out, you kind of look under the hood, you kind of see what's going on, see if you can patch it up yourself, like see if it's like some oil you can just go to AutoZone and put in yourself. That even reminds me of my car that I had when I was in high school. The battery would detach from the car, and so it would just kind of like stop sometimes, like when I would stop. And so I'll just get out the car, fix it a little bit, put a little duct tape on it, and be on my merry little way to the mall with my friends, and wouldn't think anything of it, drive it again. And so you do that little thing, you patch it up a little bit, and then you get back in the car, right? And so you're like, okay, problem solved. So the next time you're driving your car, the car actually stops this time, right? And you're like, it stopped before. I'm gonna just get out, put a little duct tape on it, fix it up. But this time when you get back in the car, it doesn't work. And you're like, crap. Now you're forced to address the issue. You're forced to seek professional help. You are forced to reach out to people that might know what's going on with your car. And so that made me think about this process, right? The pandemic has been our cars stopping. It has forced us to have to address the issue. Our coping skills are not working anymore. That duct tape is not gonna patch it up anymore. And a lot of the times in our day-to-day lives, our music, or turning our music up, can come in the forms of overworking. It can come in the forms of, getting so involved in our kids, so making sure I got to take them here, here, here. Getting involved in relationships or staying involved in relationships or friendships. And so our music is not working anymore. The car has completely stopped. And so this is now forcing people to have to get down and figure out some more coping skills, because a lot of people are like, my coping skills aren't working anymore. So what do I do now that our car has stopped? So before, we were able to just kind of push some of those things down and push it down and kind of keep pressing along, keep trudging along, get back in the car and just keep going along with life. But now we are forced to actually address this issue and seek help. And so I wonder, I wonder that that's what's happening to people today. Have our distractions, have they been yanked away from us? And now we're forced to kind of come to terms with some of those things. So I think that in this time, it's really important for me to shed some light on some of the things that you may be experiencing, right? And so a lot of the times when I'm talking to people like in session or I'm just talking to people in day to day, they always say, they come to me and they're like, I feel something, I feel off. Or a lot of the times the language they use is, I don't feel like myself, right? And so I wanna help you develop that language of what that looks like to not feel like yourself or to feel off, and talk about what that feels like. And so I think it's really important for me to talk about some of the things that I have been seeing and some of the top 2 concerns I've been seeing. So there've been 2 concerns that I've seen come out through this pandemic, the biggest ones. And I really wanna bring that to your attention, because that might help you to say, oh wow, I've been going through that too, or I noticed myself in some of those. And so the first one that I have been seeing has been anxiety. I'm not gonna say probably, I see anxiety every week. I see a new person presenting with anxious symptoms every week, probably more so every day. That's been the heightened level. And of course, we have so much uncertainty happening around us, right? I remember this is actually the time last year when everything kind of shut down, when it really became real. This is when they said, Lynell, don't come back to work on Monday. We're just gonna try to figure it out for the next 2 weeks. We thought, right, 2 weeks. This is the time kids went home from college thinking that they're gonna get an extra week of spring break, right? And then all of a sudden they're like, oh no, like the summer, we're like, oh no, the summer's gonna come, the sun is gonna come and kill all the virus, we're gonna be good, we're gonna be back to normal. Then summer hits and we find out it's actually heightened. And even for me, I was like, okay, by the time I get, for my birthday, I'm gonna be able to do my annual cabin trip, it's gonna be fine. December rolls around and we're kind of feel like we're still in the same space. And so I completely understand why people are experiencing these heightened anxiety symptoms. And so I want to show you guys, I know this is going to be a pretty long list, but I highlighted some of the most common symptoms that I see that are related to anxiety. So these are the ways that anxiety can present itself. Right? And so I bring it to your attention so you can say like, okay, wow, I experienced that. Ooh, and I experienced that too. Like, what does that mean for me? Or, oh, there's language, or I can actually express like what I'm feeling. And so I decided to highlight the ones that I see the most, like the ones that I can definitely go down the list and say, okay, if you experience this, and this, ooh, that might be some levels of anxiety. Like, let's talk about that. So someone feeling nervous, restless, or tense. A lot of times people will say like they kind of feel on edge, or you feel like you can't rest, or you can't relax. Having an increased heart rate. Some people say they experience that out of nowhere, just kind of shows up for them. Trouble concentrating or thinking about anything, or just having some present worry. That's a really big one. And the 2 ones I normally try to check in on are having trouble sleeping. Because a lot of times people stay up all night. That's when their thoughts start to come together. They're like, oh, I couldn't sleep because I was thinking so much. Or changes in appetite. That's a big one as well. And another one that I did not highlight, but really started to show up a lot more for people, is experiences with nausea or stomach pain. So a lot of people start to have stomach issues when they're really feeling anxious. And I wanted to show you guys how important this is, because a lot of times people who are experiencing anxiety, a lot of times they'll explain like a heart attack. I can't tell you how many times I've had people come to me, or clients come to me and say they had to go to the ER, or they had to go get a scan, like a MRI or a CAT scan to test their body because they're like, I'm feeling something and this feels like a heart attack. But a lot of times their vitals are completely fine, but they're experiencing high levels of anxiety. There are so many ways that anxiety can show up for people. So these are just some of the physiological symptoms that show up. And then also anxiety can present itself in many different ways. And so that's what's happening on the inside of the body. But on the outside of the body, anxiety can present itself in so many different ways as well. And so a lot of times people say the desire to control people and events, right? So you know that person that's always trying to like plan things or wants to take control over things? A lot of times that makes me think, okay, they might be experiencing some levels of anxiety or might be having anxious symptoms. Another big one that I notice, even the people around me, over planning for situations or events. So I know when I was in grad school, every single time when we would, finish our exams, me and my cohort would come together, we'd have a get together. And a lot of the times I would be the one hosting because I love having people around, I love to host. And so most times it'd be at my house. And there was a girl in my cohort, we're friends now, but there's a girl in my cohort and she would show up to the event or the gathering like 15 minutes early. And for me, that was it was honestly strange because I come from a family where time is like a suggestion, if you will. A social construct. It's subjective. It's just like a round the way type of time. So when she was coming 15 minutes before, I was like, what is happening, And so now when we got to talk, especially like being therapists, we're able to say like, I'm anxious. And so I show up early. She was able to communicate that the longer that we became friends. But anxiety can really show up in different ways for people. Another one is feeling agitated or angry. This shows up in kids as well because a lot of the times they don't know how to express that they're feeling all these different things in their body. So some of those physiological symptoms that I showed you on the other slide, they're feeling all those things in their body, but they don't know how to express it. And it happens with adults too. If you don't have that language to be like, wow, this is what I'm feeling, and I don't know how to communicate it. So this is really just to show you that this shows up in so many different ways, and it presents in so many different ways. And so I like to also show it like this, like an iceberg. So with an iceberg, all you see is this top, right? But then you find out it's so much bigger at the bottom. There's so much going on at the bottom. It's sometimes even bigger than what's happening at the top. And so that's the way a lot of times anxiety symptoms present, is that yes, you see on the outside, we see anger, we see over planning, we see negativity, we see lack of focus, we see procrastination, irritability. But what's really happening is so much more than that. It's hurt, disgust, overwhelmed, offended. And so this helps me to have a lot more grace with people when I come into contact with them, because someone is irritable. Like I have someone at work that might be a little irritable. I'm like, okay, they might be, a little anxious, right? Or you'll hear a lot of times people explain it as like a type A personality. I know a lot of times people communicate like, oh, I'm a type A personality. And sometimes that can be how some anxiety can present itself. Not everybody, but it can show up that way. And so I want you to keep this in mind for yourself and also, honestly, others around you. Because a lot of times people around us can't even figure out the language of how they want to express this to themselves. And so when you see them presenting in this way, I encourage you to think about what else might be happening. The second concern that I also see that has been showing up for a lot of people during this time and during these uncertain times is depressive symptoms, right? And so a lot of the times they can co-occur, or a lot of the symptoms can be the same, but that's one that's been really showing up because a lot of times people will have those anxious symptoms and then start feeling different emotions because of those thoughts that they have been having. And so I want to do the same thing just like I did with the anxiety symptoms, just so you can point out and see, okay, wow, like I have been going through that. Okay, I have been experiencing that, so you can have language for what you've been going through. And so these are the ways that depression or depressive symptoms can present themselves. And so the biggest one that I see is chronic fatigue and a lack of energy. People often say that, that no matter how much sleep I get, I still feel tired. I always have this lack of energy, this lack of motivation to do anything. And that's a really big indicator that you might be having some depressive symptoms. Difficulty getting out of bed. That's another big one. Crying more than your usual. And I always put your usual because crying's not a bad thing, but if you're someone who's like, nah, I cry like 2 times a year, it's kind of like the norm for me, but then you tell me that you're crying every day, then that's something that I definitely want to check for. Problems with sleep. A lot of times, like people who experience depressive symptoms or like experiencing depression, they oversleep. So a lot of daytime napping. So they might stay in bed for extended periods of time, which a lot of times with anxiety is where you stay up, you don't get enough sleep, but with depression, you get a lot of sleep. And I always tell people with this one specifically to check in on your kids, because especially that 10 to 15, 16-year-old times, a lot of the times it goes unnoticed because that time can be like a time where, teens start to kind of separate from their parents and start wanting to do their own thing. And so a lot of parents will chuck it up to, oh, they're just in the room, that's just them, they're just moody, they're just, going through those teenage years. But sometimes, a lot of times why they lock themselves in the room or they're sleeping a lot is because they're really feeling some overwhelming symptoms. And so I'm not saying you're gonna get all the answers, but just like do a little check-in. Even if you have friends that are doing the same thing or you're noticing their behaviors are changing, do a light check-in and see like, how are you feeling? They might not say anything to you, but you're creating that safe space for them to be able to come to you. Then you have changes in appetite or weight. So I know a lot of people will say that they have a loss of appetite, or they might start, like feeling like they don't want to eat as much. And so that can really be an indicator that they've been having some, depressive symptoms, right? And so with that information, I know that there was a lot of symptoms, but I really wanted you to be able to see like, okay, put language to it and be like, okay, wow, I'm feeling this cluster of symptoms. Like maybe it's time that I do a check-in. And so I'm gonna give you guys some information of moving forward of how we can address some of these things. And I know it's gonna be a lot of information, so I'll encourage you to write some things down and keep in mind that what works for one person is not gonna work for the other person. With tools, you gotta take what works best for you. Not everything that's gonna work for them is gonna work for me. So I know some people who are like, when they start feeling really anxious, they're like, yeah, I just go for a 4-mile run. I know that's not me. I don't understand how that works, but that works for them. That works for you, cool. Mine might be like, watching a Hulu show or something, but you gotta pick what works for you. So keep in mind that all these tips and these tricks might not work for you specifically, but take what does and start, maneuvering and figuring out and tweaking some of these things, because you might find some beneficial and find some more coping skills. And so what I want you to keep in mind is that what I want to start with, what I want to preface with is that everything starts with the mind, right? Everything starts with the mind. And the reason I place so much importance on the mind is because a lot of the times what we think really affects our behaviors, it affects our emotions. I'll ask a lot of times what people are thinking, like in that moment, like they might say, oh, I was experiencing some of those symptoms like last week, and I will kind of go through it and I'll say like, what were you thinking about? And sometimes I'm like, no, I wasn't thinking about anything. I kind of was just scrolling, on social media. And then they might recollect and be like, wow, no, actually, I saw someone post something that kind of, triggered some jealousy in me. And then I started feeling those symptoms. So I really believe that everything starts with the mind. Even right now, take an inventory of what you're thinking right now. You might be thinking about what I'm saying. You might be thinking about your to-do list for next week. You might even be thinking like, did I lock the garage door? Did I turn off the stove? Did I turn off my flat iron? So our thoughts are constantly going. We're constantly feeding our minds constant information. So I definitely think that the importance starts with the mind. And if you want to take it biblical, if the enemy wants to attack you, where does he start first? The mind. Because if the enemy can get you to think on a loop and just drop that little thought right there and get yourself on that self-sabotaging loop, he's good, just backs up. And so a lot of the times, like our thoughts can really control a lot of our behaviors. And so this is like a nice little, illustration of the way that I approach therapy in some ways. And so we have different, trying to figure out the non-jargony words. So we have like different approaches or interventions that we use. And so part of my intervention is, and this is like a fancy schmancy word, like it's a very therapeutic word, but it's called cognitive behavioral therapy. And the slang term in therapy is CBT. And so basically all that model means is that our thoughts affect our behaviors, that affect our feelings. And it's just the idea that all of these things are connected in some way. So, for example, if you have the thought that I am not good enough, right? The behavior might be, I'm not gonna apply for that promotion. Or if you have the thought, I am not good enough, I'm gonna stay in those toxic relationships or those toxic friendships because I'm not good enough for anything better. Or if you think, I'm not good enough, you're not gonna wanna break those generational patterns or generational behaviors. You're like, it's always been this way, like, why would it happen with me? And so then, as a result of that, you start to have feelings, where that's having some symptoms of depression, or having feelings of not being good enough, or discouraged, or just feeling sad and down. And so it's just this idea that they're all connecting. And so I do put the importance on that, because if you start thinking you're not good enough, you're gonna start walking like you're not good enough. You're gonna start acting like you're not good enough. Your language is gonna change to present that you're not good enough. And I also want you guys to think about that, this model, like when you guys are looking, if you are ever look for a therapist or you have looked for a therapist, you might see that term cognitive behavioral therapy. And that's basically what that means, is that these things can be interconnected and one affects the other. And a lot of times I hear people say, I can compartmentalize and I can separate things. Yes, you can. A lot of times, like, our bodies are trained us to do that, because in certain settings, we got to turn some things off. But after a while, they start to show up for us, even if we don't want them to. So, we've talked about the mind. We've talked about the mind and how important it is. We've talked about some symptoms, hopefully some symptoms that you've been able to recognize in yourself or even recognize in others. And so the question is now, how do we protect our mind in the middle of a pandemic, or the middle of a panoramic, as all the young ones say? So how do you protect our mind in the midst of all of this that is going on? The first step is very simple, but I think we don't do enough of this. I think we don't communicate or have the language to communicate what is really happening inside our minds, inside our bodies, and our thoughts. And so the simple first one, technology. Let's see. Well, the simple first one is, I want you to state your feelings. And even before that, I even want you to state your feelings from a feelings words list. I always present feelings words. I know it's kind of small, but I believe that's really important to say feelings words, because a lot of times we don't know how to communicate our feelings. A lot of times when you ask somebody how they're doing or how are you feeling, a lot of times people use the words, I'm good, I'm fine. As a young one say, I'm all right, I'm straight. I know I ask my brother every time when he comes from school, like, how was school? It was good. Every single day, every day's good. But the thing about those words, about good, straight, fine, all right, those aren't feeling words. And I know that it's not in normal, socially, I guess, accepted to, like, every single time to say these feeling words, but I want you to get comfortable with saying it to yourself. And so, like, saying, like, how do you feel? How do you feel in this moment? How do you feel about everything that's going on in the world? How do you feel about going through this pandemic? How do you feel about the future? And it's okay to state those. And I think a lot of the times people want to suppress how they actually feel because they're like, it's going to make it true. Just want to give a little reality check. No matter, like, if you say it out loud or not, it's still happening. It's still true. And so I think there comes a point of awareness where it's important to state what we're feeling. And so I always bring out the handy dandy feelings list, no matter whether it's with children, adults, doesn't matter how old you are, because a lot of the times we've lost how to communicate how we truly, truly feel. And so the bigger ones are, like, of course, happiness, anger, sadness, fear, surprise, disgust. Those are, like, the bigger ones, right? But I showed this list so that you're able to see that there are so many other sub words for these bigger words. You don't necessarily have to say, I feel fear. That might be more, you feel helpless, or you feel nervous, or you feel lost, Or if you're feeling some, anger, you might be feeling impatient. You might feel offended. You might feel insulted. Those are all feeling words. And so I really want people to get comfortable with first of all, just sharing it with yourself. You might think it's so simple, but it's actually like a really big deal. And then as you get more comfortable, you might be able to share those feelings with other people. And the second point to add on to that is to state your feelings and why. I think it's really important to, of course, create that language and state why you're feeling that way, using those words. And so taking the word that you use from the feelings list and inserting the why. So like, I feel discouraged because things didn't turn out how I thought they would. My friend she came over, or we talked, I think it was about a month ago, and her birthday was coming up. And she's really, really big on birthdays. I'm not so big on birthdays for myself. I'm just like, oh, we just go dinner. But she's really big on birthdays. Like, she wants to plan it. She's sending out invitations. It doesn't matter if it's 2, 3 of us. Like, she's gonna make it happen. And she plans for it in advance. They're really important to her. And so her birthday was coming up in March. And I kind of checked in with her. I'm like, how are you feeling? And she was like, I don't know. I'm just kind of ready for this thing to be over. I'm just kind of feeling down. My birthday's coming up and, nothing's really happening. And so I had to encourage her and validate her feelings. And I told her, it's okay. It's okay to feel disappointed because you couldn't celebrate your birthday the way you always do. That's totally fine. That doesn't mean that you have to sit in that. It doesn't mean you have to stay there. It doesn't mean that you can't do something else. But it's definitely okay to acknowledge that this is not the norm. This is not what we're used to. And express that you feel disappointed and discouraged. And I think a lot of times people get or feel guilty about expressing that. Because when you share, sometimes you share like how you're feeling or some negative news or like you're not feeling too amazing. We hear, well, you should be grateful that you're here today. Yes, and I'm grateful that I'm here today, and I still feel disappointed about some of the things that are happening right now. A lot of times people say, like, you should feel, grateful for this time, for sitting back. Yes, and I can still feel the emotions I'm feeling. So I really want to take away that guilt that I hear a lot of people saying for having their emotions. And a lot of times people don't want to say how they're actually feeling because they're like, okay, if I say it, I want you to be able to say I feel instead of saying I am depressed or I am anxious. Say I feel anxious right now. It can be a feeling word and just expressing how you feel. The next thing I want you to do is I want you to identify your signs and your triggers. So this means identifying your when and your why. So you're identifying, okay, so I said that I feel this way, and I talked about like my because, but identify your signs and your triggers. So when does this happen for you? When do you more than likely feel like that? When do you more than likely feel that this is uncomfortable for you? Or is it when you go around certain people? Is it when you watch the news? Is it when you scroll on social media? Like when do you feel some of those emotions? It can be really important to help you prepare when this is happening for you. I know for the beginning of the pandemic, when it had been, I want to say, probably like a week or two, maybe 2 weeks after they said, Lynell, you can go home for about 2 weeks. And I was sitting in my living room, and I was just doing some notes, and I was watching like Hulu. And all of a sudden, my heart started kind of hurting. And so I was having that chest pain, that chest tightness that I was talking about earlier, which can be like a symptom of anxiety. And I was like, whoa, I have never felt that before. I felt anxious before, like I have anxious tendencies, but I have never felt where my chest was like heavy and tight, and it really hurt, actually. It hurt. And so I was sitting there and I was like, what is happening? And the first thing that came to my head was, this is COVID. It's COVID. I've caught COVID. I don't even know what this is. So of course I was freaking out. But then when I was able to like calm myself down, I started reflecting, and I was like, whoa, Lena, your sleep's been off. Your appetite has been kind of messed up too, and your stomach even felt kind of nauseous. Like maybe you're feeling anxiety. maybe you're feeling anxious, right? And so that was one of my signs. And I realized that after looking back, before I left for the week, I had clients that were coming in showing me the numbers. Like each second as it came in, they'd have the phone in the hand and oh, it went up again. Oh, it went up again. And consistently and constantly talking about, I gotta go buy toilet paper. So I'm leaving the session like, should I go buy toilet paper? Like, do I need to stop by the store before I go home? So I was getting kind of triggered. And so I didn't know that this was happening to me. So one of my signs was, okay, my chest started getting tight. And people who were presenting with anxiety was serving as a little bit of a trigger for me. So I had to put some things in place. So I think it's really important to identify like your signs and triggers. Is this happening during certain weeks? Is this happening during certain times? And figuring out what that looks like for you. And then after you kind of identify your signs and triggers, I believe that it is certainly important to figure out what things are in your control and what things are outside of your control. I love this colorful piece. Like, adults love it, children love it, and I had this up on my wall for a really long time until now I'm able to like check myself and say like what's in your control and what's out of your control. And so with this wheel, it just really just brings it to life to say, okay, what are the things that I can't control? I can't control other people's actions. I can't control if someone doesn't physically distance. I can't control that people are traveling. I can't control when this pandemic is gonna end. I can't control the problems of the world. I can't control other people's feelings. I can't control other people's thoughts. And then you're able to, okay, once you realize what's outside of your control, and I want you to feel empowered because there are things that you can control. You can control whether you physically distance or not. You can control what you talk to your kids about and how you present this information to them. You can control how long you're on social media or how long you're watching the news, right? And so thinking about what are the things that you can control? So your behaviors, your reactions, your efforts, your words, and really remembering the things that you can control. And this is really important after you figure out what you can and can't control, is creating a strategy. Strategies are really important because a lot of times people will say, I don't really want to talk about that until I'm feeling those feelings, or I don't really want to address coping skills because if I talk about it, I'm going to get back there again. But you got to remember, you don't just go to the Super Bowl if you haven't practiced. You just go to the slam dunk contest if you haven't been doing it or practicing throughout the week. So you got to create a strategy of how that's going to look. Because if you know that your mood kind of ebbs and flows, it kind of goes up and kind of goes down, I think it's really important to create this strategy. So for me, when I started having those kind of like anxious symptoms, I started recognizing, okay, so my anxious symptoms happen on Mondays. So my body was able to recognize, okay, so on Fridays after 5, we watch Netflix. Saturday, we're watching Hulu. Sunday, we're chilling too. And then Monday, wait, we're still relaxing? We're still chilling? And so my body couldn't get back in touch with it. It couldn't get back in touch with itself. And it was like, okay, so I recognized that my Mondays were the things I need to plan for. And so my plan consisted of a routine. So Sunday nights, I would meal prep just to create some level of routine. I would create a kind of day by day or time by time of when I was gonna do the next thing. So I did something for the mind, which might be reading, did something for the soul, doing a new Bible plan, and then I did something for the body, which include like some physical activity like walking or doing like an elliptical. And so creating a strategy. Your strategy can look completely different, but just putting a plan in place for moments where you don't feel like your best or you feel like you're kind of feeling down or you're feeling kind of down in those moments. And so I think it's really important to prepare for when you're having those feelings and those emotions. And then I think it's important during this time of, I feel like a lot of people feel that it's a moment of isolation. Maybe you have expressed that they feel alone, they've been feeling like isolated. A lot of times in this moment, people want to withdraw. They want to withdraw from other people. They don't want to share what they've been feeling. So they're like, okay, you know what? I don't want to be asked about how I'm feeling, so I'm just going to withdraw. So I think it's really important that in this moment when you want to withdraw, I want you to do the opposite. Ooh. Ooh. I want you to build and maintain connections. I want you to build and maintain connections. These are really important because in moments where you want to withdraw and you want to isolate, I think it's really important to reach out to others. You don't even have to explain what you're going through, but just to be able to say, you know what, I just need some connection right now. I just want to be around other people. I want to be able to talk to other people. So whether that's joining groups, I know a lot of people who get together with their friends on Wednesdays and just have like a Bible, either as a Bible study or as a book club, or just getting around just to talk about a movie that you watched. But just maintaining those connections that you're with. Another important tool that can be used during this time is journaling. Journaling, there's something very therapeutic about the journaling process and journaling your thoughts and having a place to like kind of express yourself. And I know there are three main barriers that I've heard the most with people who journal. And the first one is that someone may read my journal. I know it's a really big one that I hear a lot of times when I suggest journaling. And I trust me, I get it. I had, like about 3 weeks ago, my mom, I was hanging out at my parents' house, and my mom came in and she was kind of laughing about it. And she told me that she read my journal from 6th grade. And I still, no matter how many years it's been years since 6th grade, but I still felt violated. You know, you read a piece of me that was so vulnerable. And so if anybody has that barrier, I completely get it. If you've been to 6th grade, you understand that those are some hard times. So I was writing about those hard times. And just to know that she read that, like I know how the feeling is, that privacy was broken. But I do have a solution or a suggestion for how you can combat that. So now in the world of technology, we have like the notepads on our phone. So if you're more into technology and you don't want to just write it down, like type it. So at least you know that you have it. Even using a Google Docs, like on your Google Docs, and having that so you always have it with you and it's locked away, password protected, that's another thing that you use. Just a suggestion. So what happened to you doesn't happen to me. Help me help you. The second one that I hear people say a lot is that they don't want to physically write, which I completely understand. It can be kind of hard to like write every day and write journal prompts and things like that. And so I've heard a lot of people talk about video journaling. Video journaling is getting more popular. Or audio journaling, because a lot of people say they don't want to see their face on camera, which I totally get. But just maybe doing some audio journaling and writing that down and being expressive in that way. Because the goal really is just to be able to express yourself, you know, fully and completely, right? And the last barrier that I see to journaling that people talk about is I had someone express where they're like, I don't want to go back and look at the dark stuff. I don't want to go back and look at the pain that I was going through during that time. I don't want to see that again. And it can be really painful to go back through your journal, but also really therapeutic to have that moment where you get out of that season, you're able to look back on that. And so I encourage you, for a solution for that, is to have 2 journals. I have a journal where, you know, it's your journal where you express everything, you write everything out, you talk about everything that's kind of hurting you. And then a separate journal for things for like your sermons, your Bibles that you're reading, Bible study plans, or just words of encouragement. And so I have my positive journal where I'm like, that's my I'm gonna see a victory journal, where I write all the great things in it. I'm like, yes, yes, yes. And then I have my other journal where I'm like, okay, can anybody hear me? All right, I've been going through this dark valley for a minute, your valley journal, right? But the great thing about having both of those outlets is in the moments when you're like going through a valley or going through a dark time, you can look at that positive journaling and say, okay, I'm gonna make it through this. Or the moments where you've made it out of that valley and now you're at the mountaintop, you can look back and say, wow, like I made it out of that season, and this is what that meant for me. And then the last suggestion or tip or coping skill or tool, whatever you want to call it, that I have for you is, of course, seek help or get a therapist. I think that there's something so amazing about having a space where you can be your authentic self, where you can take off the mask of whatever you've been putting on for the rest of the world and be yourself in that space. A level of time that's been carved out specifically for you to be able to express yourself and uncover patterns and behaviors and emotions and learning how to communicate feelings and feeling words in a room of someone who is not judgmental, can provide insight and really serve as a mirror for some of the things that you've been experiencing. And so a lot of the times I hear, specifically, I mean, this is not only, but specifically from older generations of saying, Jesus is my therapist or God is my therapist. Yes, and I don't put the two on the same level. I feel like, God, Jesus up here, and therapists is just, we serve as a tool. We serve as something supplement to whatever you're going through. We're here to help. We're here to help encourage you on that path of healing and of hope and of insight and of figuring out who you are and who you want to be and helping you to work through that. I'm a therapist who believes in going to therapy. I love having my own space to be able to talk about things. Sometimes even my therapist will say, Lynell, like, do you think that could have been done a different way? And in my head, I'm like, whose side are you on? But it's really good to have that, someone to be able to tell you some of those things, to see how you present in different settings, whereas some people around you might not want to. And so I want you guys to know that you can have God and therapy. A lot of people don't think the two can coexist, but they can. God can be your foundation, and therapy is just something to help get you there, push you along, something to help you in that moment, to help you, provide you with skills, help provide you with tips and things that you just may need along the way. And if you want to incorporate God into therapy, you can find therapists who have and offer a Christian perspective, who offer that, and you can disclose that, and you can be very specific in who you want as a therapist. And I always encourage people to look for someone who you can be your authentic self with, someone who you would, I know crying is kind of uncomfortable, but someone who you would feel maybe comfortable crying with when the time came, or would feel like you don't have to hold back. And so I want you to be really intentional about finding that space and finding someone who works for you, and not just finding anyone. You can be really selective with your therapy process or your therapeutic process. And so I hope these tools and these strategies can help you as you navigate this, I want to say, new normal, this moment of uncertainty, this moment of not knowing what's next. And I want this to just serve as like a foundation for how you'll move forward, and just serve as like a little nugget of something that you can take. You take something from this and build upon it and create your own path for coping and for dealing and managing stress. And so if you don't, one of the biggest takeaways that I just want you to take away from what I have said today, from just the state of the world, just about whatever is happening, is that the importance of your mental health is just as important as your physical health. Now, I'll say it again. Your mental health is just as important as your physical health. Many times I see people who they break their leg, right? Or someone says they tore the ankle. They're running to the doctor. Or I know when I have a toothache, I'm running next day to the dentist, right? We're not gonna walk around like this with our leg broken, right? So why, when our mind or our thoughts are off, and I don't wanna use the word broken, but they're off, and we need a reset, why don't we run to seek help? Why don't we take care of our mind just as much as we do our body? And so I encourage you to if you've been struggling, if you've been in a place that you've never been in before, if you've been feeling like not yourself, or been feeling like, as they say, on edge, or been feeling different, I encourage you to seek help. Reach out to those around you. Reach out to a therapist. And if you have any questions for me, please reach out to me. And even if it's not for therapy services, just to help you, connect you with better fits, or connect you with resources, or connect you with tips and tools and things that could really benefit you. And so if you have any questions, really please feel free to email me at lynell@healatl.com. Feel free to follow me on Instagram and like the page on Facebook, Get Mindful with me, and follow subscribe to my blog and website, getmindfulwithme.com, where I just talk about all things mental health. I hope that I was able to leave you guys with something today, that you have a takeaway, and I hope you learned some more coping skills and some coping tips. And if you have any questions, I would really encourage you guys to reach out to me and let me know if you want any of the slides, if you want any of the things that I have, the images that I had that can serve as like a coping skill. Please feel free to reach out. And it's really been a pleasure to talk to you about mental health. And I really can go on and on and on and on about this for days, but I hope you're really able to get something from this. Thank you.